My name is John Ramirez. I served at CIA from 1984 to 2009. And in those 25 years, I was assigned to the Directorate of Science and Technology in the SIGINT field, and in the Directorate of Intelligence as a weapons intelligence analyst. I ended my career with the Office of Director of National Intelligence in the counterproliferation field. Now at CIA, I was what is known as a technical electronic intelligence, or as anyone in the military or the IC with that type of background would know, is called tech-elant. Now, what is tech-elant, and how does that relate to UFOs or UAPs? Well, let me describe tech-elant first. Tech-elant is this discipline under SIGINT that is related to emanations of electromagnetic energy radiated by weapon systems, such as surface-to-air missiles, such as cruise missiles, ballistic missile defense systems, air-to-air missiles. You get the idea, weapon systems. And we don't just collect and analyze the parameters of these weapon systems signals. We also dive into what made this emanation work. How does it work? And try to reverse engineer in software using modeling and simulation the actual transmitter and receiver chain of that particular emitter. We're literally reconstructing that radar or that seeker on paper within the computer and try to exploit it in that manner. So it's a little bit more complicated than what most military people call ELANT, which is operational ELANT. That's just basically like collecting or detecting signals and looking it up in a database and associating that signal with a known emitter. So how does that relate to UFOs and UAPs? I am intrigued that the USS Princeton, CG-59, might have collected emanations of an electromagnetic nature from the Tic Tac. I know that the USS Princeton has a piece of equipment that I'm very familiar with called the AN/SOQ, or SLIC 32. It is a countermeasures piece of equipment designed to collect signals of a threat nature and then generate counter signals to deceive or to deflect that particular weapon systems. And I'm being very, very careful in my description of the SLIC 32. I myself was an electronic warfare technician prior to joining CIA. And as an electronic warfare technician, I'm very familiar with how signals intelligence is conducted on board a Navy ship. I believe that if these signals exist, and I have a suspicion where they might be, it opens up an avenue of other research and opens up an avenue for a Freedom of Information Act request on at least the fact of that such signals were collected. Now, who would characterize these signals in the intelligence community and in the military, in the defense community? Well, obviously, the National Security Agency is the SIGINT agency for the U.S. government. Having said that, the CIA also does signals intelligence, but in a different way and for a different purpose. And it's beyond the scope of my explanation now. But CIA also does SIGINT, and that's why I was an ELANT analyst in the CIA and not at NSA. So NSA probably might have these signals. Now, who else might have these signals? I believe the Office of Naval Research might have collected this data from the Princeton. And my suspicion is it is a group known as, within ONR, Code 31, Division 312. And Division 312 is Electronics, Sensors, and Network Research. And part of that is electronic warfare. So the Slick-32 being an electronic warfare piece of equipment on a naval vessel, I do believe that Division 312 might have analyzed these emanations from Tic Tac and other similar craft where a signals intelligence collection system was able to collect these signals. And again, it's a whole very, very right field for a FOIA request to find out for sure. From the scale request of the Pentagon book, we learned that DIA was on the ground collecting optical, electro-optical, radiological, visual, electromagnetic emanations of the phenomenon. This is a field known as Measurement and Signature Intelligence, or MASINT, and DIA is the intelligence agency responsible for MASINT. On the ground, on Earth. But what about in space? What intelligence agency is responsible for collecting similar types of intelligence from space? Let me introduce you to another three-letter agency, NGA, or the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The NGA is responsible for collecting imagery of the Earth from space and also the space above the Earth. There's a distinction. One is looking down at the Earth, one is looking at the space right above the Earth. Therefore, NGA is likely to be the intelligence agency that might have collected UAPs in flight. And this intelligence agency is not well known amongst those who follow the UAP issue. But let me take you on a little scenario. Let's say NGA analysts, their imagery analysts, detected unusual orbs of energy, light orbs, in their imagery. And let's say that these energy orbs were flying in formation under intelligent control with an intent to a destination. Now, the first thing that the NGA analysts would do was to eliminate plausible explanations. It seems reasonable. Let's look at Occam's razor. Let's see what it could be. So that's where the weapons intelligence analysts will come into play, looking at the inventory of China and Russia. What do they have that could do similar things? Now, let's say that one of the craft in the Russian inventory, the MiG-31, carries on board a plasma stealth generator. And the plasma stealth generator can produce a similar type of electro-optical signature to these types of satellites collecting imagery. But the weapons intelligence analysts eliminated the MiG-31 because, first of all, the MiG-31 cannot fly above 123,000 feet. It still floats that record above 123,000 feet for an air-breathing craft. It usually flies between 85 to 100,000 feet in a combat mode, designed to look down and shoot down a fast-moving aircraft. And what would that be? The SR-71. And that is why the SR-71 doesn't fly anymore. It's very vulnerable to the MiG-31 and its capabilities. So let's eliminate the Russian MiG-31. What next? Well, then the imagery analysts will go and look at the software, the processing software on the ground. And it checks out. The software is fine. It did not create these aberrations in the data. Next is the spacecraft itself. NRO is responsible for the care and feeding of these spacecraft. And they designed these spacecraft where they would know more about these spacecraft than anyone else. So they will look at these spacecraft collecting imagery, and they say, oh, they're fine, nothing wrong. So now we have an interesting issue. So the NGA and NRO together decide that they need to deep dive into what is going on. And they create a working group. And they invite subject matter experts from all the major intelligence agencies and their contractors. And they create a compartment for this effort. And they meet at an NGA facility. And let's say that they studied this in depth and they looked at every plausible, unusual explanation going back to the UFO files and its disposal for this working group, because they have the staff compartment to look at them. And they decide that, okay, there is something up there, like orbs, that we cannot explain. And they brief the Director of National Intelligence at that point. And they write a report for the Director of National Intelligence. And the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, they will queue up something called decision levers, because they need to brief the highest level of government, the President of the United States. And you never take a problem to the President. You take solutions. And that's what the decision levers are. They're options that the President can execute. And attached to every decision lever are possible outcomes and an assessment of unintended consequences. And it's up to the President to decide what he or she might want to do. The intelligence community never, ever makes policy. That is up to the President to make policy. And the policy was, we need to study this phenomenon more, but not provoke it. And so that's queued up. And then we have ALSAT coming in through the wings. The previous working group was in Title 50. That is the civilian side of these intelligence agencies. CIA is totally Title 50. That is civilian, not military. The NRO, the NSA, DIA, the NGA are also known as combat support agencies under Title 10. They have a defense role. And as a defense intelligence agency, not DIA, but a military intelligence agency, they're responsible for examining threats. And that's where ALSAT came in. Now, when you tell the Pentagon that Congress wants it to capture something, it implies some kind of kinetic force. That is, shoot it down. And I'm not sure that's the way to go. I don't hold my breath for any kind of disclosure from the government. Disclosure implies a top-down approach from the government to we the people. In turn, I favor more of an upward approach from the people to the government, an approach I call discovery versus disclosure. And in discovery, citizen science plays an important role, as well as now we can actually ask our candidates for office, what do they feel about UAPs? What is their policy? What is their intent on investigating UAPs? It's no longer some weird crackpot question. So what about all these craft that people are seeing? Whether they be saucer-shaped, cigar-shaped, triangles, or orbs of energy. I myself have not experienced a metallic craft that is a saucer-shaped, cigar-shaped, or triangular-shaped craft, or an acorn shape, or whatever many, many different shapes these craft appear to people. I have experienced light energy orbs in my life. I'd like to relate to you an interesting story because the synchronicities are amazing. I was on a flight from BWI, that is Baltimore Washington International Airport, to LAX, Los Angeles International Airport. I happened to be on that flight to attend a UFO conference with a CIA colleague. Let me say this. Both of us are traveled on our own dime. This was not an official CIA trip in any way. We were both interested in UFOs because of experiences we had personally in our personal lives. Now, having said that, it is a requirement for CIA officers when they travel, even on a personal trip, to report that travel to the Office of Security External Activities Branch. So I did so, letting them know that I was going to a UFO conference. I gave them my flights and the hotel I was staying at. And so on the way there, on the plane, we were flying over I would say the southwest part of the United States, getting close to California, and the pilot reported a UFO. Now let me explain that. It didn't occur over the intercom. Back then, United Airlines used to broadcast the air traffic control and cockpit voice communications over Channel 1. And they did that through these old-fashioned pneumatic headphones that you plug in. It was purely a tube plugged into air, if you remember those days. And I was tuned to Channel 1. And there was not much going on, just the usual air traffic control talk. And to understand why I was on Channel 1, I am an aviation nerd, geek, whatever you want to call it. I love listening to that. And so over the Southwest, I heard the pilot or someone, the co-pilot maybe, report to air traffic control that they spotted a fast-moving orange orb on their port or left side of the craft at a distance, and that was coming across into their flight path at a very rapid speed. And the ATC reported that they held no contacts. There was nothing in the sky correlating to the visual report of the cockpit. I immediately looked out the right side where I was seated, the starboard side window, and there it was, an orange orb flying from the south to the north. Interesting, though, that in the southwest, north of our position, there's Nevada. So I keep that in mind. But there it was, an orange orb. It had absolutely no physical shape other than it was spherical and it was orange. And it receded and gave off this orange light, but it wasn't a shiny light at all. It wasn't as if the light shined from within to without. It just was this orange orb, as if you would cut out a large orange disc out of some orange construction paper, brightly lit, kind of like fluorescent, and there it was. I couldn't see any kind of like spectral energy coming off of it. It was just orange. And it so happens that, that it was with this experience going to a UFO conference. And I've always thought about that. Now, do I discount the other sightings of triangles or saucers or cigar shapes or any of the shapes? No, I don't. Even though I personally have no knowledge of those kinds of craft, I believe that we should embrace everything widely, but hold things lightly. Hold things lightly so that they're applicable to you. They may not be applicable to someone else. But don't just toss it away saying it's impossible. No, I don't believe in this. It's ridiculous. I don't do that. And I've been enriched by doing that because later I may find information, either something I've researched or something that was, and I would say downloaded to me, that something I held lightly should be held a little more tightly. I do know that there is something flying that is unacknowledged. I've never been read into that program. I know it exists, and here's why. Because I know the customer for this program. The customer is, again, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And so this intelligence agency, of course, is concerned with imagery intelligence, optically and electro-optically. So whatever is flying that is unacknowledged, whatever shape it might be, is collecting from an aerospace altitude those types of data. And that's all I know, and that's all I can say. I personally have been never cleared or do not have any knowledge of a craft, but I don't discount anything. I'd like to address the recent release of notes purportedly taken by Dr. Eric W. Davis on a conversation with Admiral Thomas, who was director of the DIA. Do I believe these notes are authentic, genuine? Yes, I do. And here's why. And there's two reasons why. First of all, I am very familiar with the Special Access Program process. And at CIA, we have the Controlled Access Program process, SAPs and CAPs. I was a CAP officer in charge of a very sensitive program dealing with a relationship we had of a very covert nature with ostensibly an adversarial country. And because CIA cleared my presentation for public release and said nothing in that presentation was classified, I can reveal this, that the Central Intelligence Agency and the People's Liberation Army of China had a technical partnership to build collection facilities in China. CIA officers built what ostensibly would be miniature pine gaps in China to collect technical intelligence against the Soviet Union. CIA officers worked side by side with officers of the People's Liberation Army. CIA officers trained officers of the People's Liberation Army to use sophisticated electronic equipment, similar to what we have at Pine Gap and probably closer to what we had in Iran at these sites called Hexman that the Shah allowed us to have to do the same, monitor the Soviet Union. And we will monitor ballistic missile tests and other tests at Sarai-Shagan, which is the Russian equivalent of Area 51 and White Sands Missile Range all rolled up into one. And that was a controlled access program, extremely sensitive. On this controlled access program, there was a bigot list. And you've heard of bigot lists already. It is extremely, extremely narrow in that there are very, very few people on that bigot list. So even though that you might have a top secret SCI clearance, you may not be on the bigot list. Even though you might have a titled position in the intelligence community, you may not be on that bigot list. So on that bigot list, I can reveal that there were presidents of the United States, secretaries of state, Department of Defense officials, including the Secretary of Defense, the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, and at that time it was called Intelligence and Security, INS, and the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, ATL, and a whole host of CIA officers, but numbering like very few, from various parts of the CIA, including logistics, technical officers such as myself, people responsible for making this program run. There was a few NSA personnel on it, no DIA personnel whatsoever on it. I don't recall the then director of DIA being on that list. So yes, you can have a very tightly controlled program without a major officer of the intelligence community on that program. The fact of the director of DIA knew about these programs That's one level of a SAC, the fact of, that you know this program exists. That's what Admiral Wilson knew, but he wanted to know more, and he was denied that. The programmatics, as we call it, the logistics, the budget, the location, the progress made in that program, all of the details at the program level, he was denied. And I believe that that's possible based on my own experience with this other program. Now, I just want to say that I was the Control Access Program Officer for this at a very brief time because I did not want to have this responsibility. So I returned it to the sponsoring office, which I cannot reveal. But I returned it saying, I don't want this job. But it was very, very insightful to see who was on that bigot list and who was not on the bigot list. Now, secondly, I happen to know Eric Davis in a way that he does not know I know him. And I can't reveal, I don't have his permission from Dr. Eric Davis to reveal how I would know him. But there are several CIA officers in a managerial capacity that knew him. And so I hope that Eric Davis will reach out to me, or I can reach out to him to see if I can tell the rest of the story. And if you hear the rest of the story of how these CIA officers know Eric Davis, I think it will surprise you based on the timeline of what Eric Davis was doing at the time, his work with the Air Force Research Labs, and his subsequent work with OSAC. And that's all I can say for now. Eric, I would love to hear from you. So what does the government know and what doesn't it know? Well, the government knows a lot, and you know the government knows a lot. More than what they're willing to share, more than what they've released in FOIA. I would say this, that as we progress forward, since 2017, a landmark year for ufology, the government seems to be able to address this more openly. We have the release of the book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and I have my own presentation, which I thought would be redacted in many, many ways, but it went through completely without redaction. And I say the phenomenon with a capital P because that's the way the government kind of lumps it all together. Whether it be like metallic craft, light energy orbs, presence of ETs in a corporeal sense, higher consciousness, what's being channeled, what's being experienced, it's all labeled under the phenomenon, including, as we learned, the more disturbing aspects of the phenomenon, which appear to be malevolent to human beings. So it's all lumped under phenomenon. And the fact that we can discuss this now is a big step forward. Now, as far as what the government doesn't know, I addressed it, this phenomenon that seems to be malevolent or from strangers, I call it. The government, I think, is still grappling with that issue. And I say strangers in the sense that it is my personal belief that there are residents, visitors, and strangers. Residents being, I believe, entities that have been here long before humanity appeared, and in fact, may have had some hand in making us who we are today. Otherwise, we'd still be primates with bonobos, chimpanzees, and gorillas. We're not. We've been elevated. And I believe it is the residents who did this. And I know that's very controversial, but it's a personal belief. That's how I sort it out for myself. And the visitors might actually be from other worlds. And the strangers, I don't know where they're from, but it seems very frightening to read the accounts of people, documented people, who have experienced very disastrous effects, very tragic effects with their health from encountering the disturbing aspects of the phenomenon.